Hey, fellow superhero cinephiles. Did you know that almost 30% of adults say they haven't read a book in the past year? The primary reason why is a lack of time. Well, Audible's here to help with the gift of found time. Thanks to Audible, you can listen to audiobooks like Marvel Comics, The Untold Story, or Slugfest, inside the epic 50-year battle between Marvel and DC. Read up on the history of superheroes in comics and movies with Grant Morrison's Super Gods. You can also check out Vanguard, my original superhero novel series, or try The Vril Agenda or The Adventures of Fortune McCall, both of which were written by our dearly departed host emeritus, Derek Ferguson. Whatever you're looking for, Audible has thousands of titles that you can consume while commuting, exercising, cooking, or just relaxing at home. And not only audiobooks, an Audible membership also gives you access to tons of content like podcasts, theatrical performances, and exclusive Audible originals that you won't find anywhere else. To give you a taste of what you can get, Audible has partnered with this show to provide listeners with a free 30-day trial. All you have to do is go to audibletrial.com/supercinemapod, and with your free trial, you get one free audiobook and 2 free Audible originals. In fact, you get to keep those titles even if you cancel before the trial is over. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to audibletrial.com/supercinemapod and start your free trial today.
Oh dear.
You wish me to return to the cold nothingness of space? You wish me to give up the body? Never! There is a power beyond good and evil. The power to create and the power to destroy.
Jean! Can you hear me?
Jean Grey can hear nothing. Speak only to the Phoenix.
Jean, fight it! Use the powers of your mind! Remember what we mean to each other. Jean, please, don't leave me!
Scott, help me. Enough! You are of no use to me!
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and I'm here with a new guest host, and that is a guy I met through the House of X Facebook group, and that is Greg Dunn. Greg, how you doing today?
Oh, not bad, Perry. I appreciate you inviting me on the podcast.
Well, I'm glad to have you on. We had talked about when I was looking for someone to come on and host the Grant Morrison podcast I'm doing. You were one of the people who was interested, but by the time we had gotten in touch, I'd already gotten a team assembled. But I thought this would be a little consolation prize or so.
Oh, I appreciate it. You know, you just seem like such a busy guy, and like really popular, apparently.
I don't know about popular, but busy is definitely an understatement. So anyway, how about tell people a little bit about yourself?
Well, I spent maybe like 12 or so years in broadcast journalism, and just recently stepped into public relations and that kind of thing. But I have loved the X-Men since I was in like first grade, and absolutely think they're like the coolest thing ever. So I learned to read, I feel like, or at least expand my reading when I was a kid growing up in South Korea, because there wasn't a whole lot of YA stuff at the base bookstore. I'm an army brat and did some growing up in Seoul, Korea, and there wasn't any YA stuff. The closest thing to YA stuff was X-Men comics on the comics rack. So I just gravitated towards it, and the show was coming out, the animated series was coming out at about that time, and I'm just zoned in on it.
So, well, that's a good way to talk about it, because today we're you and me are doing a 2-part episode. We're talking about the Dark Phoenix Saga, first the adaptation they did in the animated series, and then the most recent movie. So let's go ahead and start with your background. And Was it so the animated series that was available on the base? I got a friend who's in the
Oh,
military, and they
well,
have like I know they got like a military TV channel or something like that.
it the if I remember right, that there's like a service in like the commissary, or like they had a catalog back in the
Mhm.
early 90s where people on my parents could like look through the catalog, and it was like a Sears catalog, but it was run um by the DoD, and they found the video cassettes, like the single episode cassettes. And then by like 1994, we had moved back to the States. And then I'm able to actually see it, like new episodes every week on
Mhm.
Fox Kids or whatever it was. And obviously the animation wasn't the greatest thing in the world, but at least quality wise. But it was I don't know, just mesmerizing seeing like uh the team, and having various people, and the fact that diving into the comics, I find out that uh Jubilee is Asian, and I'm ethnically, I'm half Korean. So
Mhm.
I'm my mother was Korean, and my father is Tennessee redneck. So like it just really appealed to me.
Yeah, yeah. So that's interesting that you mentioned that about Jubilee, because watching now the series is on Disney Plus, so I've been rewatching episodes here and there, just kind of like in the background. And she they didn't really draw her as looking very Asian in
No.
that series, and
No.
so much so that when they first portrayed her in live action in the Generation X movie, it was a white actress playing her.
Yeah, and it really, and it goes back to me, finally getting back to the States and like digging through back issues and
Mhm.
finding out that kind of stuff, and being totally thrown off that Psylocke is actually British, because when
Mhm.
I when I meet her in the comics first, is like, oh, this is clearly an Asian woman, and wait a minute, but no, if I go further back in these old issues, wait, she's British. It was just very confusing,
That
but
was yeah. I remember when I first started reading the comic books. I think that was one of the stories that I like dove right in the middle of when I first started picking up the comic books, and just having no freaking idea what the hell was going on at all.
yeah, that's the fun of X-Men comics, I think, or
Mhm.
the danger of it, if you just like dive into it, or if you came into it in the 90s and had the frame of reference from the TV show, because they were adapting a lot of older storylines,
Mhm.
but also coming up with, like, the whole first season is just kind of a hodgepodge of 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 different things, but going, like, especially adapting the Dark Phoenix Saga and the Phoenix Saga in the third season, just like the whole idea that they adapt an old story, and you're like, wait, what's going on? Because
Mhm.
the main what really captured me later in the mid 90s were reprints, and also there was a weird series that I'll consider like, how do I put this? It's like a shot for shot remake of the first 16 issues. They got another writer to update the original 16
Oh,
issues.
was that
It was
a
called
Professor X?
Professor
And
Xavier and the X-Men.
yeah, I remember that
And
book. I remember that book.
and it really, and that's what really made me visually appreciate the original team more.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, the '90s series was sounds like for you, it was also my gateway into X-Men comic books as well. Um and they had done something kind of smart with that, because they had used mostly the same cast that was in the comic books. Like it was obviously pared down, right? They didn't have Psylocke on the team, or Archangel, or Iceman, or Colossus, or any of those, but like it was basically the blue team plus Jean and Jubilee, more or less, and
yeah,
Storm.
and
Um,
Storm, yeah.
and that made it really, and it was the same costume designs they were using in the early '90s. So it was I remember the first comic book I bought was I think it was X-Men 24, where it was Gambit and Rogue on the cover about to
Oh yeah,
kiss. And yeah, and
yeah.
I remember thinking from the animated series, like, oh, they can't kiss. Oh my god, they're gonna kiss in this issue. What? And I had to read it. I had to see what and of course they didn't, but still.
Right.
That was my first glimpse of being teased by the cover and then not getting satisfied by the inside.
Oh yeah, no, you have to get used to that with the
Mm.
X-Men. I mean, uh, or really any Marvel comic,
Or
but
yeah, pretty much any comic in general.
yeah, uh, yeah, it just blew my mind, and I was just so interested in the whole idea that nobody liked them. Like,
Hmm.
you had the Avengers of the Fantastic Four who were basically like public celebrities, and nobody liked the X-Men, but they were constantly saving the world or doing something
Right.
better for everybody. And so I gravitated more towards the X-Men and Spider-Man and that kind of thing back then.
Yeah, same here, and it certainly didn't hurt that they had that both of those had really good cartoon series in the time, and then when they got to Avengers and Fantastic Four, not so much.
Yeah.
um, but so Dark Phoenix Saga, like this is obviously considered by many to be the best X-Men story ever told. Um, I personally quibble with that a little bit. I personally put it on God Loves Man Kills as the best, but what are your thoughts on that?
Um that's tricky. Honestly, if I don't know that I would pick God Loves Man Kills. I would honestly, I think I would pick the Days of Future Past, that
Oh, okay.
two-parter.
That's a good one too.
Um and I understand why people really love Dark Phoenix, and I love Dark Phoenix.
Hmm.
Like, what is it, issue 129 to 137, but it's tricky because not too long ago, I went back and I started reading from when Chris Claremont,
Hmm.
the writer for the X-Men, takes over, and it like from when he takes over right after Giant Size all the way to really 137, it's one big arc.
Yeah.
And the Dark Phoenix Saga is so dependent on little hints, and the first Phoenix Saga, the early,
Hmm.
like, Jean becomes Phoenix way back in issue, what, 101 or something like that. And because there's so much baggage already, it's like uh season 3 or 4 of like a 4 season TV show or something like
Right.
that. And I appreciate it. It's great. It's awesome. And I think personally 137 is gun to my head, that's probably my like favorite issue ever.
Hmm.
But greatest X-Men story ever, I don't know. I think there's too much alien baggage, too much weird stuff with or too much baggage really with the Hellfire Club, and
Hmm.
and the fact that they're just trying to manipulate things. But honestly, I would say Days of Future Past is probably a better story because it's the whole Holocaust
Hmm.
subtext to it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and you touched on something that has always been kind of that's always kind of held me back with Dark Phoenix Saga as well, and that's that it doesn't really have anything to do with the root of what the X-Men are all about, which is that that civil rights metaphor, that discrimination metaphor. None of that is in Dark Phoenix Saga at all, and it's basically just the X-Men doing Star Wars more or less, and which and it's fun. It's a great story. And it's very emotional, but it gets away from what the core of the X-Men are to me, and that's why I gravitate more towards God Loves Man Kills. But you make a good point with Days of Future Past as well.
Yeah, and I do love God Loves Man Kills. I just wonder, I wonder too, because of if it doesn't age as well
Hmm.
here in 2021, simply because Kitty, um, you know, throws around some words that she probably shouldn't throw around, but it
Hmm.
was, I realize she's trying to make a point with it, back in the 80s.
Yeah. That's a good point too. Uh, well, some of Claremont's dialogue in general just doesn't really age very well. I found
No.
going back and rereading some
No.
of those books. But anyway, but still, but anyway, the Dark Phoenix Saga, it is considered like by many to, if not us, by many to be like the seminal X-Men story, and I think it's been the most adapted when you think about it, because it's been adapted like 4 times. We have the animated series.
Mhm.
We had X-Men: The Last Stand. You had,
Yeah.
Dark Phoenix, and then also the Wolverine and the X-Men kind of adapted it as well in the 3-part Foresight Act episodes at the end of the first season.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Although
Yeah,
that was more based on the ultimate version of it, but it was still basically Dark Phoenix.
yeah, it's been a few years since I've seen the Wolverine the X-Men version of it. I do remember at the time thinking, this is what they, as far as like overall format with Wolverine the X-Men, I'm like, man, this is what they should have done with Last Stand instead of the mess
Yeah.
that Last Stand kind of was.
Yeah, same here. And that was such an underrated show too. I've been rewatching it lately, and like the '90s series will always hold a special place because that's what got me into the X-Men and then comics in general. But that show has not aged as well as Wolverine and the X-Men has, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Just from remembering a few years ago watching Wolverine the X-Men, and I did a full rewatch of the animated series, maybe like 6 to 8 months ago, and like the heart of the pandemic. And it, man, looking at it and seeing some of the jerky animation, I'm like, well, I guess I just totally missed it or overlooked it, back in 1990, whatever. And that and gosh, there is a lot of Gambit is just a hound dog, isn't he?
Well, when you're a kid, you don't really notice that stuff too, as well. But also the animation was not really that sophisticated back in the '90s. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Batman was so groundbreaking, was because it was this very beautifully animated series, and that animation holds up even to this day. But X-Men was still using the kind of like '80s style animation techniques, where it was very much kind of shoestring budget and that kind of thing. So they weren't really putting a lot of time and effort into it, and some of the voice acting grates on me. I mean, sure. Wolverine, I think, is the guy who did Wolverine. I got the cast list here. Bring this up. So yeah, Cal Dodd, who did the voice of Wolverine, he was great. Chris Potter as Gambit was pretty good as well, and Cedric Smith as Professor X, mostly okay. Although it's tough for me now because after Patrick Stewart and whoever did the voice in X-Men Evolution, and then later in Wolverine and the X-Men, I felt they were better, and I more associate Professor X with that kind of voice now. So the Cedric Smith one doesn't quite hold up as well, but it's still decent. George Buza as Beast as well was really good, but like Storm, I hate Storm in this series and how they go full
everything.
Yes, they go full Claremont with her, and she announces for a while I thought she had to, that was how her powers work when I was a kid, that she has to verbally announce what she's doing.
Right. Well, somebody I was just talking about Storm in the animated series with someone else, and then listening, somebody made a point that it's almost like poetry, like a spoken word, and especially they pointed out it's sort of like how Maya Angelou would like read her work when she was out, reading her work, with the deep, like, wind and rain and feel the power of my lightning. And well, it worked in 1993 or whatever.
Yeah. And I also don't like, for a while I hated Cyclops just because of this show, because he's really annoying in this series.
I think honestly, I think I'm one of the people that I related to Cyclops the most, because I was the kid who was like, guys, we got to follow the rules. Like, like everybody else loved Gambit and Wolverine because they were, they were always, I don't know, they would throw.
They were the rebels, yeah.
Yeah, but I was a kind of a cautious kid, and I think I'm still a little cautious now. And like, uh, no, we have to follow the rules. And I love Cyclops because here was this guy who had to keep himself in check on the time all the time, and he followed the rules.
Hmm.
So, every,
So when it comes to Dark Phoenix, which was your first exposure to that story? Was it in the comics or was it in the animated series?
I think it was the comics actually. By that
Mhm.
time, um, I had found. Well, you know what? So there was this trade paperback called "The Greatest Battles of the X-Men."
I had
That
that one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I read 137 and the other issues in that book before I read I think any other X-Men comic, and
Hmm.
I just latched onto it, and I didn't even know at the time like the stuff with the Hellfire Club. I just had the conclusion to the saga. It's like I had watched Return of the Jedi without seeing Star Wars and Empire Strikes
Right.
Back. But that was my first exposure. And then, by the time I got back to the States, I had access to what I called the coloring book editions of
Hmm.
X-Men. They were the essential like the essential Marvel collections with they were printed on like thin newspaper pulp, and I
Oh
called
yeah,
them
yeah,
coloring
yeah. I
books
remember.
because
Yeah, I
they
remember
were
those. The
yeah,
the
they
big
were
black and white collections. Yeah, I remember
yeah,
those.
you got like 16 issues for next to nothing, like
Yeah,
for
yeah.
$20 or something like that. So as a kid, I'm like, okay, I can save up my money and buy one of these and get like a whole bunch of story. Um, and that's really where, yeah, that single issue from Greatest Battles of the X-Men, that was the first exposure I had to Dark Phoenix.
I was trying to remember last night as I was rewatching these episodes if that was because I do remember that trade paperback, and that was. I'm pretty sure I had watched the first season already because I knew I was kind of surprised because Days of Future Past was in that too, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken. Yeah,
yeah, it was right after
and
it.
yeah, and I was really surprised because I was really confused when I was reading Days of Future Past in the comic book. I'm like, wait a minute, where's Bishop? What's going on here?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Uh, but I can't remember if we had gotten to the Dark Phoenix Saga by the time I got that trade or not. So, and so or if I had read the Dark Phoenix Saga, because I know there was a trade of Dark Phoenix Saga that I had gotten from the library, but I can't remember which one came first. It's like a chicken or the egg situation for me.
Well, I had assumed that everything in the animated series was, after seeing the first season,
Mhm.
was happening afterwards, just because they're adapting the show, and this must be happening afterwards. And even Gene has like a throwaway line that somewhere in the first season, I think when Sabretooth is at the mansion. It's like the
Mhm.
third or fourth episode, but I swear she has a throwaway line about her darker past.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah. She says she does mention something. Yeah, she mentioned something about like we all have like a dark past or something.
Yeah, so I just assumed that, well, maybe they won't adapt it, but here they go.
Well, the continuity in
Changing
that
their mind.
series was kind of wonky, and I think part of the reason is because they didn't have a dedicated writing staff, right? It was just all freelance, basically. They had the two showrunners were on. I was listening to the ex-wife podcast, and the two showrunners from that series were on there talking about it, and apparently like they didn't really have like a dedicated writing staff, so it was just kind of like each episode was written by like different people, and they didn't even know if they would go past the first season. And basically they were just given kind of the characters, and they had Bob Harris as a story consultant over at Marvel, so they were able to run things by him. But they didn't have like necessarily like a series Bible or something where everything was laid out like you'd have with most TV shows nowadays. It was very just kind of slapped together, and it shows because I remember because you see Archangel appears in the first season, right? And he
Right.
doesn't know any of the X-Men. Magneto appears in the first season, and it seems like it's the first time he's meeting the X-Men. It's not quite clear. Um, Even the episode with the Juggernaut, it kind of seems like he knows everybody, but at the same time, sometimes they're talking like they don't know him. And then but then you get to later on in the series when you have the Iceman episode, which was one of my favorites, and you see the flashbacks, and you see Angel in the flashbacks with the original X-Men fighting Magneto. So they didn't really do very good job with some of the continuity there.
Well, it's like typical X-Men retcon. You just throw in and you just duct tape it together. I guess later on, you just you do what you need to do for the episode and justify it later.
So anyway, talking about the adaptation then, what were your thoughts rewatching these episodes?
Well, it wasn't bad. I didn't. I guess I. Let me think about this. I've forgotten the part where Dazzler was basically just kind of there to throw off Jean / Phoenix, and then she was more of a. There wasn't a whole lot to her, but she only gets the one episode. As far as an adaptation, it does. I think it works for the most part. What does bug me, I guess, is the whole idea when that because Jean doesn't kill the broccoli people in the cartoon like she does in the comics, then it creates this whole situation of they're putting her on trial for property damage. Now, granted, it's like an entire star system, but she's being put on trial and potentially put to death for property damage. So I'm like realizing this, just now, like, gosh, that's a harsh part. Death is a harsh punishment for just property damage, basically.
Lander doesn't mess around, I guess.
Yeah, no.
Well, she also damaged the ship too, so I guess she's a little bit pissed that she's got to buy a new ship now.
Yeah, it's kind of rough. It really does change the whole dynamic, I feel like, if you dive into it, because the broccoli people who get used later on in the Dark Phoenix
we'll get to that. we'll definitely get to that. But yeah, the Dabari, that was my biggest. I do remember I did see this before I read the story, because I remember reading the story. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, there are people on this planet that she's killing. And I'm like, that wasn't in the show. So that was a big shock for me. And it allows it's weird. You're right. It is kind of a weird way for her to punish, because they're basically punishing her for something that she might possibly do in the future. They're punishing her for her potential to be destructive. But the thing that stood out to me most was that it allows them to then use this way they get permission to use Claremont and Burns' original ending for the Dark Phoenix Saga, which is Jean survives, but she gets. Well, they use a variation because she still has her powers at the end. But in the original ending, they had planned was that Jean would survive, but she would be stripped of her powers, and then her and Scott would have retired from the X-Men and kind of gone off into the sunset to start a family. That was the original plan to end, and that was kind of something Claremont wanted to do, was have these characters rotate in and out of the X-Men, and eventually, characters would come in, they'd age out, or they'd retire, and then they'd move on, and they'd be replaced by new characters. And eventually he was going to have Xavier die completely and Magneto fully take over the school. But then, Jim Lee wanted to go back to basics and all that. So they had to get rid of all that stuff, which is not necessarily a bad decision. I understand why. Because you want to keep that brand alive people want to read their favorite characters anyway. So,
well, I wonder too, thinking about that, because it's really like in the mid 80s, I feel like, where they introduced, what did they call it back then? Like the 7-year rule. That it would always be 7 years since the Fantastic Four went into space. And
I think it was Byrne who did that. Yeah. And it was like 5 or 7 year sliding timeline, he said.
Yeah. So because really before that, there's like a Christmas issue every year,
right?
And Cyclops is dropping references to how many years ago the plane crash was when he was a kid, and firmly grounding them in the timeline. And really, if it makes sense to rotate characters out if you're
Mhm.
going to establish that it is 1980 whatever when those comics actually come out, and then you're going to replace them, especially in a school setting, with new characters, new
Right.
generation, and just adhere to it's about the current present, and then the 60s stuff really did happen in the 60s
Mhm.
and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, and the second the deadly, or not the deadly Genesis, the second
Second
Genesis
Genesis,
team
yeah.
actually is in the 70s and that sort of thing. So yeah, I can kind of see where retiring people makes sense, and
Mhm.
plus, like he didn't necessarily create any of those characters. Lean like it, that I feel like that was Len Wein and really like Marvel bullpen creation. So time to rotate in some new blood.
Right, right. You mentioned the Dazzler thing too, because I remember she was part of the Dark Phoenix Saga as well. There was this whole thing with the Hellfire Club and the X-Men both trying to go after New Mutants, and so they had one group that was going after Dazzler, and then another group who was going after Kitty Pryde. That was her introduction.
Mhm.
Which is interesting now when I'm watching this, because they really did not want to use Kitty Pryde in this show at all. She's like the one character who never appears once in all the
Yeah,
episodes.
yeah. I wonder why that is.
Well, apparently, it had a lot to do with Pride of the X-Men, because they were worried, when they were putting the show together. They thought about using Kitty Pryde, and you can see like Jubilee in this series is basically Kitty Pryde, right? She's
Yeah,
got none of the Jubilee personality from the comics, really, um, and they had wanted to use Kitty Pryde in the beginning, but then they realized, oh wait, well we got this Pride of the X-Men pilot, and if we do the same thing, people are going to think we're just redoing the pilot again. So they wanted to avoid those kind of comparisons, and so apparently that seemed to have kind of created this situation where they never use Kitty at all.
huh. See, I mean that is the one thing about the animated series adaptation I would kind of harp on, is because if you remove Kitty Pryde, you've also watered down Emma Frost's involvement,
Mm-hmm.
because and it shows in the episodes, um, you know, because you're only getting basically half of some of the story from those original issues where it's just Dazzler. Because yeah, in the comics they split up, and what is it? Half the team goes to check out Dazzler, and the other half go, to meet Kitty Pryde and that kind
Mm-hmm.
of thing.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. It totally waters down Emma's part in the story, and which is why and also and then in First Class too, and X-Men Origins, we get watered down versions of Emma in both of those, and then mentioning Wolverine and the X-Men, that was the only time we got an Emma in other medium that was done some amount of justice.
Yeah. In fact, and like in the comic, and correct me if I'm wrong, like Emma's not in the later Hellfire Club stuff, right? Because she she just helps Mastermind establish the connection, and it's
No, no,
just
she remains active with the Hellfire. I believe she's active with the Hellfire Club, but she becomes more active in the school side of it with the Hellions, and so she
oh,
becomes more active in the
I
New
just mean
Mutant stuff.
the Dark Phoenix story itself, because
Oh, yeah, yeah.
yeah, she gets like, I don't know, brain burnt out or something like that, and she's out of commission through the rest of the Dark Phoenix saga, and she
You're
doesn't
right.
come
You're right.
until
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're right. You're
until
right.
like way after.
I thought you were talking about Hellfire Club stuff in general, but yeah,
Oh
you're right.
no,
In that series, she basically comes in, and I believe it's Jean who basically like kind of like knocks her on her ass and then like takes her out of commission for the rest of that story.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, you're right about that. And she doesn't really have much of a purpose in these episodes either. Like she's basically just there to kind of help Mastermind, along basically.
yeah, and it really visually you need her there
Mm-hmm.
to kind of fill out the Hellfire Club, and you, I guess with a kids TV show, walk the line with using a comics accurate costume with her.
Well, I thought that was funny because I noticed her costume is more or less comics accurate. But when it came to Jean's Black Queen costume, all of a sudden they gave her blue leggings. So,
Oh yeah,
so there was some. So apparently they couldn't go full bondage with Jean, but they could with Emma because Emma was a villain. So I guess that was okay.
She's a bad guy. It's okay. You get away with it.
But also you can see looking back on this show the standards and practices influencing things, like the fact that they're not allowed to be called the Hellfire Club. Instead, they're just the Inner Circle and the Circle Club.
The sign says Circle Club.
And I think Wolverine and the X-Men had the same problem too. They also didn't call them the Hellfire Club, if I'm not mistaken. They were just called the Inner Circle as well.
And even I'm years later picking up on nobody says kill, you just say destroy.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that was one of the things. Like they could not do certain things in those shows, and like even when they fired guns, like you notice all the guns in those episodes in that whole series, they're all energy blasters. None of them fire real bullets, and that was because that was a rule. You could not fire real bullets. In fact, Batman the Animated Series was groundbreaking in that way because the guns fired real bullets, and I remember, especially if you look at some of the behind the scenes stuff about the Spider-Man TV series, like they had some ridiculous rules. Like if Spider-Man lands on a roof, there can't be any pigeons on it or something like that, because we can't make it show that he has hurt any pigeons, or it was
not scaring any pigeons.
It was ridiculous. Yeah. Or like they couldn't show him like directly punching someone. It would have to be like reaction shots only, or it was because of the backlash over Power Rangers, apparently had influenced a lot of the stuff with Spider-Man. And so like Fox got terrified about offending parents because of that.
Well, I know as a kid I was offended by punches not connecting properly and people not flying backwards. I mean, I wanted big action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and well, also like you mentioned the destroy thing instead of kill, and Jean doesn't kill anybody in this Dark Phoenix. She doesn't kill anyone. She just they make a point of saying that the captain's bitching about the fact that they're mapping this uninhabited star system because they can't have Jean killing anybody. So no broccoli people die here, and even at the end, right? Jean doesn't die at the end. She's brought back to life. But even still, they never say that she is dead, right? They say her life force has been extinguished or something like that.
Right. She hasn't been killed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, her life. Yeah, watered down language. Well, I really, because you can't, for a kid's TV show, you can't really stick with the original ending from the comics where she decides to commit suicide,
Right.
So even though it's the most noble, she thinks she's saving the galaxy by killing herself. Yeah, I can totally see someone at Standards and Practices saying we can't condone any kind of suicide.
Right. Well, that's a good point too. I realize that as well, because it's in the comic book, she sets up this gun to kill her at the end there. But in the show, it's a blast from the Shi'ar gun from the ship. And they do make a point, though. I did catch on something, though, and I think this is kind of a way they snuck it in, because they make a point of saying that the weapon, they've lost control of the ship or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think they kind of hint that Jean had taken control of the ship and had tried to kill herself that way, but they couldn't come right out and say that.
Well, I remember that now. The weapons get wonky, and the professor says something about or one of the technicians say, "Oh, the weapons are back online," and the professor is convinced that it's Jean like fixing it. But then there's a really clear shot though of Lilandra slamming on the control. So I'm led to believe it's like Lilandra, pulling the trigger.
I think it's done that way intentionally so that they're kind of giving themselves cover in case anybody picked up on what they were doing.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel the same as the original comic, where you figure out that she set that whole thing up, and she kills herself with the old alien gun and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. In general, though, I think they did a pretty good job of staying true to the comic book, because they seem to mostly have the team. Like Wolverine, Storm, Cyclops, they were all part of the team in the original. Beast as well. He was part of the Avengers then, but he came in for
right.
This
He
part
guest
of it.
spotted.
and Angel was there as well, and then who doesn't really have an analog in this version, but Colossus and Nightcrawler, Rogue and Gambit kind of served the Colossus and Nightcrawler roles in this one, and they did a pretty good job of working them in, like especially during the Imperial Guard fight, right? You have Rogue standing in for Colossus in the fight with Gladiator. You have both Gambit and Wolverine stand in for Nightcrawler at different points. Like there's when Wolverine's sneaking around, that was Nightcrawler in the comic books, and when Manta nails him. Another one is during the battle with Earthquake and Hussar. That you had Gambit in that one serving in for Nightcrawler. Mm-hmm. So they did a pretty good job of working them in there, and then they left out Jubilee, doesn't appear at all in these ones, and which makes sense because you could put her in the Kitty Pryde role, but it doesn't really fit because she's already part of the team.
No, yeah, you would. Yeah, she doesn't fit it all really, and I don't know where you would put her. I really just and I also watched the original, the first 5 regular, or not the dark part, but the regular Phoenix Saga. And picked up on that too, where they do the same thing. They're taking the cast they have and just filling them in spots and moving people around. I mean, the only really iconic thing I remember from the comic that is not in the Imperial Guard fight is a fastball special. That's the only thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
because you don't have Colossus.
And one of the things I really liked too was Beast and Storm's discussion in this, right? About justice and all that. I mean, I'm rewatching it last night. I'm like, this is pretty sophisticated stuff for your kids' TV show.
It is, and I think that goes back to the whole idea that she's on trial for something she might do.
Right, exactly.
And property damage.
Yeah.
But because it is a lot different when you dive into it and you consider the fact that she committed genocide, unintentionally, maybe in the comics, especially with the story. Are you familiar with it, with like John Byrne, like just kind of filled in the Dabari, the broccoli people, so to speak, at the last second? And that
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that I remember reading that somewhere, that they were never supposed, like it was supposed to be to kind of fit with the original Claremont narrative, but at the last second, for whatever creative reason, he decides to there was like a miscommunication with what was going to go in those panels, and he decided to put aliens in them just to give it a little bit more weight. But and then it went to print, I think, without Claremont's. I don't know, I might be misremembering the story, but I'm pretty sure that the broccoli, the Dabari, were a last second addition, and they didn't realize the fact that they had turned Jean into a mass murderer.
I do know that Jim Shooter wasn't aware of it. That's something I definitely remember. That Jim Shooter only found out about it after the book had already gone to print, and then when he was talking that he had confronted Claremont about this, and he said, "What's going to happen to her at the end?" He's like, "Well, she's going to be depowered." He's like, No, that's not good enough, right? She committed genocide on a planetary scale. She can't just get off scot-free. She's got to face some punishment for that. And that was when they redid the ending.
Yeah, I mean, how do you walk somebody back from that?
Yeah,
even though they're just aliens, but you have to give weight to it. And I'll make a I guess a teaser to when we talk about the Fox Dark Phoenix movie. There's a moment in there when I think the movie really embraces the idea that it's the darkest timeline, is when like, how much weight do you give to the bad guys if they're not human? I mean, they're still aliens, they're still living people. So how easily can you just throw life away and that kind of thing? I think there's a deeper message to it that that all life, whether it's alien or mutant or human, needs to have some kind of meaning, and that if we take it away, whether it's uh, somebody uh, who's just like a throwaway pawn, their life, like if you look at a movie from the point of view of even like the stormtroopers in Star Wars, their
Mhm.
lives should still have meaning and that kind of
Mhm.
thing, and even the foot soldiers to the bad guys, even their lives have meaning. Like with the animated series, one shot that rewatching that I really love that they kind of stuck the landing with and adapted was when Harry Leland sends Wolverine into the sewer,
Mhm.
and he splashes down the sewer. It looks like the same John Byrne panel when he
Yeah.
rises up out of the water, but again, a big difference in the comic. He just slices and dices his way through those Hellfire Club guards, but
Yeah.
obviously in the comic, standards and practices walks them back where it doesn't seem like he actually probably kills anybody.
No, they actually make a point. Like he retracts his claws and then punches them out.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was always kind of one of the interesting things about the series. They've got Wolverine with his claws, and he can't really use them
Yeah,
except when they're
he
fighting
can slice
Sentinels.
up a door,
Yeah, yeah.
he can slice up a lock, but yeah, he's not drawing blood anywhere.
It was the same thing with. I was a Ninja Turtles fan back in the '80s as well, and like the same thing, right? Like Leo and Raph, they can't really use their weapons.
Oh yeah, and those original comics with who was the like Eastman and
Eastman and Laird, yeah,
Laird. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they were
they did not hold. No, they didn't hold back in those at all.
no.
But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Wolverine thing. I wanted to mention that too. I thought they did a really good job of that, and just these little bits of Wolverine when he's coming up through the Hellfire Club, like when the guy's asking for the bottle of wine, then Wolverine knocks him out, and then he looks at the bottle and he's like, "Oh, that was a lousy year." Then he takes the turkey leg. But yeah, just those little moments like that; those are really well done. Uh, Overall, I mean, it's. I also like that they found a way to use Jean's original costume in a way that made sense. They don't say that she was. I noticed that he didn't say you're, because in the comic book he says you're dressed as Marvel Girl,
Yeah,
and he doesn't say that this time. He just says you're wearing your original X-Men uniform.
yeah. Another uh another little slip that would, if you're paying attention in the Iceman episode, then no, it's not really
Yeah,
her
because she's wearing the
original costume.
she's wearing the yellow and blues in that one. Um, and just as a side note, I hate that they brought back the green dress costume in the House of X stuff.
Me too. Um, I, especially after X-Men Red,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there. I don't know I think there's something that bothers me about a grown woman regressing back to a code name like Marvel Girl.
Mm-hmm.
I and and they seem adamant about not wanting to call her Phoenix with all the stuff that's going on in Jason Aaron's Avengers.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, um,
I mean, I
you're kind of
understand
between them.
because I understand not wanting to use the Phoenix stuff because after Resurrection, the whole idea is like she's put all that behind her,
Mhm.
and I thought X Men Red did a really good. Even though I wasn't really so sold on the X Men Red costume, I don't like the like bulky shoulder pad thing, but still, like I prefer that to the going back to the green mini dress.
Yeah, uh, Russell Dodderman did a version of the '90s costume. I like the color scheme.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was in the Silent issue that he did. Midway through the Dawn of X. Yeah, it was like a callback to the Grant Morrison issue where
Oh, the
uh,
Nuff Said issue.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
uh, he updated the costume. It was like a marriage of the '90s costume with the green dress color scheme.
Oh, okay, I'll have to look that up.
And if you read that, that's the costume I would prefer her to be in nowadays. But I think hopefully we'll get there. I don't know. I feel like there's something else going on in the comics right now with her and Beast and all the resurrection stuff, and they might come back around to finally revealing what's going on. The and I think there's another potential connection, um, especially with the whole family dynamic
Hmm.
that's been in there with Scott um, and both of the kids, Cable and Rachel, and everybody living in the same house.
Hmm.
And I think it's almost like this is what we always really wanted and that kind of thing. So she's trying to be, nice mom Jean rather than grown up, uh, uh, all grown up and that kind of thing,
Hmm.
and leader Jean and that kind of thing.
Right,
I
right.
think it's more of a maternal thing.
That's a good point. Okay. Well, I'm still kind of behind on this. I'm getting these stuff through trades when they come on
Oh,
sale on Comixology. So like I'm only up to I haven't even gotten to Ten of Swords or X of Swords or whatever it's called.
oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I don't want to spoil anything for you, but yeah, there's Russell Donovan does a callback. It's a whole issue where she and Emma, Jean and Emma, basically have to do another psychic rescue, and so
Oh,
the art
okay.
is just absolutely beautiful, and I think you'll appreciate it if you like the Nuff Said issue from Grant Morrison, because
Yeah,
it's really
that was one of the
uh,
best issues of that run. So I'm looking
yeah.
forward to when we get to cover that on the podcast. Anyway, one of the things too I thought was interesting about this is when they have Dazzler in here, and it was they used her 90s look, I noticed,
Yeah.
which seems very odd because that's like when she was, this rebellion leader in the Mojo verse,
Right.
and she's doing it, and instead she's using it as a lounge singer. So she's got like the pouch belts and all that, and it just seems really out of place.
It it does. And is it the same voice actress as Rogue? So I feel like she has a slight twang
I'm not sure. That's a good
to
question.
her voice. And and her hair was a little more red.
Yeah,
Than,
yeah. I thought that
it's
was
like
weird too.
it's like they were trying to make her look like Jean, so Jean would seem more jealous when she like walks into the club and she plants one on Cyclops
Hmm.
and Phoenix like loses her mind.
Yeah, I think that was the intent because I noticed that too. That she was like more of a redhead as opposed to blonde, like she's in the comic books.
Mhm.
And it is funny seeing her in the '90s look. I mean, I guess the disco look would have looked kind of dated, but that '90s look doesn't really work either.
No, yeah, I don't know. Maybe there was something coming out in the comics where they're like, what the heck?
Hmm.
We'll just use her current comics look, because that seems to be like the default thing that they do with some of the characters guest spotting is like put them in like Colossus. When he guest spots on that show, he's never he's always in like a tank top.
That was yeah. Colossus is like the only one who, for some reason, doesn't wear a costume, whereas every other mutant who has some cameo always shows up in a costume.
Yeah.
I remember thinking that was I was remember rewatching the Colossus episode a few weeks ago and thinking, I'm like, wait a minute, how come Colossus is the only one who gets to wear street clothes? Nobody else does.
Well, it makes even less sense when they give him a second episode where they go back to Russia
Hmm.
and it's cold, it's snowing, and he's still, if I remember right, and he's just in that white tank top.
Right. And then meanwhile, you get the Nightcrawler episode where he's, in full costume later on, or the Archangel episode where when Cable attacks, right, he's wearing his costume underneath his clothes, which I don't even know why he's wearing a costume if he hates the fact that he's trying to hide the fact that he's a mutant.
Oh man.
But some of the choices in that were weird. Although speaking of cameos, I did notice, and I got a little kick out of the Doctor Strange and Thor cameos we had in here.
Oh yeah, I yeah, those were fun. I feel like there was something like that with the comics too, where because when Phoenix has her
Hmm.
big energy burst, we touch on, and then there was the Watcher too. The
That's right, the
callback
Watcher.
to
Yeah, yeah.
the
I knew there was someone else I was forgetting.
um, well, the problem with the cameos is that and I went back and watched the original Phoenix Saga episodes right before, and there's another Doctor Strange cameo in that, as well
Hmm.
as there's a Hellfire Club cameo. So when she activates, you like they were setting up. Here's what's going to happen next. Here it's coming down the line and that kind of thing. But it the only problem with that is that having the two Doctor Strange cameos in two different episodes, like, man, what Doctor Strange should be like, running down the street
Hmm.
help out.
Yeah, yeah. Um, they did a few of those little cameos. I remember in the episode when Magneto establishes Asteroid M, that and he's picking up a bunch of mutants in Africa, and there's a Black Panther cameo, right? He's
Yeah.
kind of watching over the whole thing, and they had done a few of those here and there, and of course they did have they did a crossover with Spider-Man eventually.
Yeah. Yeah. Those were fun episodes.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Although the animation in that was even weirder because it was like it was even cheaper animation than they use in the X-Men series.
Oh, yeah.
I remember thinking it was very odd because even some of the coloring was just very off.
Yeah. It was almost more washed out.
Yeah.
Like everything was lighter. And I'm just happy that, that they have the same voice actors. So you at least have the continuity there. And um, that this was, all the same universe and that sort of thing.
Well, apparently there was some rights issues with that. Like just doing that, what was like 2 or 3 party. It was apparently there was a lot of red tape they had to cut through, and so much so that when Spider-Man did Secret Wars at the end of in the last season, they originally wanted to bring all the X-Men in, but they couldn't because of the rights issues. So that's why they had that little story thing where there was only enough energy to bring one of the X-Men.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because they just bring Storm. I'm just
Mhm.
um
Well, so I think also, I'm not mistaken, they had the Fantastic Four in that, and also and they had Iron Man and War Machine, and I believe those were the same actors from their respective animated series as well.
yeah. Yeah, I remember Iron Man and War Machine sounding the same. Um I'm pretty sure the Fantastic Four, I feel like it, because I rewatched the whole animated series in Spider-Man, and
Mhm.
I keep planning on, like, oh, I'll get to Iron Man and Fantastic Four here in a little bit, but
From
I
what I
haven't got.
recall, the Fantastic Four one was like universally reviled. Iron Man, if I'm remembering correctly, people hated the first season, but the second season they liked a lot more.
Yeah, they upped the animation quality. It's like I
Right.
feel they must have went to a different animation house, because I
Well, the first season they were trying to do like kind of like it was like kind of almost like a GI Joe Master of the
yeah
Universe type thing because they had like Force Works going up against the Mandarins, and in the second season they got rid of Force Works and they got rid of all that stuff, and it was just Tony on his own.
yeah um yeah the I do remember the quality being a lot better in the second season,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
plus they redid the opening. um
yeah, yeah.
the opening of the first season was like a weird CG kind of thing, but then
Hmm.
later on they opened with a really cool, uh uh rock, grunge rock kind of opening, and he's like
Hmm.
just slamming the hammer. It's so much more like striking, I guess,
Yeah,
literally.
yeah. I remember that as well. And what else was I going to mention? Um, and then they had the Incredible Hulk cartoon too. That was I remember that being pretty good as well, especially
Yeah.
in the second season when they brought in She-Hulk. I remember that being well received.
Everybody loves She-Hulk.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So anyway, uh, any final things to add about this 4-part? Which is basically, it's basically a movie split into 4 parts, right? It's an 80
Yeah,
minute movie.
yeah, it's just it works as an adaptation.
Mhm.
And they made it fit, with the bigger animated series kind of story. And despite the watering down, I guess you would argue, for a kid's show, I still
Mhm.
think it works. And there's always something awesome about a duel with Cyclops in a three-corner hat. Uh, um, but yeah, I like it. I had a good time rewatching it this time around, and kind of remembering how fun it was, and
Mhm.
and and I'd forgotten about the golden tree. At least
Oh,
when
yeah, yeah.
Phoenix starts when she starts showing off her powers, and she turns a tree into, like, I think she's supposed to turn it into gold, right? Just
I
to
think so,
show
yeah.
how
She, like,
powerful she
transmutes
is.
it into solid gold.
Hmm.
Yeah, pretty much same thoughts as you. Even with the watering down, I mean, this is still the best adaptation we've gotten of the Dark Phoenix
Yeah.
story, and the series benefited from waiting until the third season to do it. So we had built up and we had seen Jean's power level grow, because if you remember those early episodes, most of the time she didn't even go out into the field. She just kind of
Right.
hung back at the mansion most of the time.
Right. She
Um,
was she was just passing out a
yeah,
lot.
she passed out a lot with like making the orgasm noise every time she did.
Ah. Yeah.
I also
Yeah.
never understood why they went with the ponytail in her costume instead of just the full hair like they did in the comics.
I don't know. You think it was easier to animate?
Maybe that
It's just
that
because she has like a because it's pinned back, it's almost like a
mhm.
coif.
Yeah. That was just kind of a weird choice that I remember rewatching these episodes. Um, but yeah, they did a pretty good job. Some of the voice acting, like I said, doesn't hold up. Some of the animation definitely doesn't hold up, especially when they incorporated like some shots of real fire in that, and it
Oh
just
yeah.
like when they had that close up when she's confronting Mastermind, and the shadows of her face they have real fire there instead. It just looks so terrible. Um, so some of that stuff doesn't hold up, but I do like that they do hint at the larger world of the Marvel universe, right? You get the Kree and the Skrull referenced in
Yeah.
here. You get the Doctor Strange and Thor cameo. So I do like that they do give these hints of the larger universe that's going on around them too. Um, and yeah, it's even though it's watered down, even though it doesn't hold up as well, it's still the best we've got so far, unfortunately.
Yeah. Adaptation wise, it is the best that we've got so
Mhm.
far.
All right. Okay, Greg, anything you want to promote before we close up this episode?
Um, uh, Not really. I You can find me on. I'd like to. Hold on, let me start out. I wander around the hashtag X Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at never done right. It's never DUNN right.
Mhm.
But otherwise, I'm just a fan that loves this stuff, and yeah, message me about X-Men stuff and we'll chat about it. And you might see me on certain X-Men Facebook groups, just throwing my opinion out there.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot, Greg. And we're gonna take a break here, and then we'll do our episode on Dark Phoenix. So for those of you listening, you're gonna have to wait a little bit, but yeah, tune in next time for our discussion of the Dark Phoenix movie, where I'm probably gonna give myself an aneurysm. So. All right. But until then, head on over to superherocinephiles.com. Hit us up on Twitter and Instagram at Super Cinema Pod on both of those. And please leave us a review on iTunes or anywhere you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. You have been listening to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Super Cinema Pod. Join our Facebook group by searching for Superhero Cinephiles, where you can interact with us and other superhero fans. If you'd like to support the show, you can become a regular supporter at Patreon or make a one-time donation through PayPal, both of which can be found at our website, superherocinephiles.com. If you buy or rent any movies through the Amazon links at our site, it helps support the show. Please be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.